You know, there's nothing quite like the spirit of competition, is there? Like how those who are masterful artists put in blood, sweat, and tears perfecting their craft, competitive players do the same, with the difference being that the end goal is how much better you are than everyone else. The main kind of game that makes up the majority of competitive sports are, well, sports. But in the past decade, the world of esports, aka electronic sports, has been growing significantly. We now have million-dollar competitions over video games like Dota and League of Legends, a concept that would sound like a joke a number of years ago. It seems more and more people are finally realizing that the mental energy and reflexes seen in an electronic sport are just as valid as the physical strength and reflexes seen in a physical sport. Even all of the major gaming companies that foster competitive games put in their own resources to help these competitive scenes thrive. Capcom, Blizzard, Epic, Activision, all except Nintendo. Now, the odd thing about Nintendo is that while they've always been the popular choice for multiplayer experiences, they've never tried to make them competitive, at least not on purpose. When you think of a competitive game, you likely think of a traditional fighter, as more so than any other genre, they're designed in a way that's trying to leverage itself to working in a competitive environment, being that it's a 1 versus 1 duel with little or no random elements, and serving as a true test of skill between the two players. However, games like Mario Kart and Mario Party are designed with the same goal in mind that all of Nintendo's titles are designed with, and that's to be fun. But obviously that doesn't mean people don't get competitive with them. There are countless diehard fans with the skills and passions needed to be one of the best at these titles, but due to the format of these games, that skill can't be properly demonstrated in a tournament bracket, and thus those skills are demonstrated in an ulterior fashion. But completely accidentally, Nintendo made a game that was more perfect for a competitive environment than even most fighting games. And I'd say its name if it wasn't obvious what I was talking about. Through a long list of oversights and shorthanded decisions resulting from the incredibly short 13-month development time, Melee was a supposed party game that was left as an open book in terms of what could be done beyond what the designers intended. Many actual fighting games wind up unlucky, whether it be because of a game-breaking glitch, some horrible design oversight, the meta being solved quickly, or because the game is just boring. But Melee, a game designed with no competitive intention, remains a title with an exciting meta, intense movement and tech, a nice balance between the best characters, and a skill ceiling that really has yet to be reached. There's enough videos on what makes Melee as special as it is, but what really makes Melee Melee is the die-hard competitive community behind it, and Nintendo doesn't like that. It was made evident by their later games that they did not like the idea of their games being played in any kind of serious fashion, as they would make active changes to their games to reduce their competitive viability. Brawl most notably added tripping to the game, a random element that bogs down the game to feeling like a joke at times. And Smash 4 added things like Rage, reducing the skill needed to pull off a comeback, along with drastically limiting the movement between these two games compared to Melee. Their efforts weren't even limited to just Smash, with them trying to transform even Mario Party into a game where everybody wins, which is another problem that I could go on about. Beyond sabotaging their own games through design, Nintendo would also give little to no aid towards the Smash community. As I mentioned earlier, other companies put in their own resources to help their game's competitive scenes thrive, whether it be by throwing large amounts of money at tournament prize winnings, or by sponsoring tournaments and players, basically helping them move up in the world. Nintendo's never done any of these things. Really, the most they do is host their own tournaments that usually fail to follow competitive rule sets, and none of them ever had any kind of significant prize. Although the Smash community was still able to thrive through their own efforts. I want to say that Smash 4 was when things really started picking up, as more and more people learned of the competitive scene around that time. Since then, the numbers for both people entering events and people watching the game only grew larger, though the backbone of all the success is really thanks to the tournament organizers and the top players. The top players are the ones dedicating basically all of their time to the game, making sure that they put up a real fight against the rest of the competition, and additionally adding a real substance to the competitive scene, giving faces for those joining in to look up to and admire. The TOs, however, serve as the single most important people in the entire scene, as without them, there wouldn't be tournaments. They're the ones securing the venue, setting up bracket, buying dozens of consoles for the event, making connections, basically trying to make sure that these passionate players are able to express their passion. Though for both TOs and top players, They don't see near the reward that they deserve for all the time they put in and all the sacrifices they make to keep the community alive. This is really why the support from Nintendo would have been such a big help. Those putting all their time into entertaining you and making sure you have an event to go to aren't making a living. Many are even taking a loss. With Nintendo's support, hell, even Nintendo just bringing more attention to the scene, it opens the door for these courageous individuals to make it into a full-time job and turn the scene into something more lucrative, as more sponsors would take notice and help fund these events and players. And with more and more big brands helping boost the scene, it would see exponential growth, turning it into something larger than anyone could imagine, just like any of the other big esports. So basically, although the scene was still successful without Nintendo, they really could have used the help. But again, with the ever-increasing world of esports, there was always a hope that Nintendo would change their ways and see the value in supporting the competitive scene. This hope would only grow as Nintendo finally started making games that were specifically designed to be competitive. More specifically, ARMS and Splatoon. While ARMS really wasn't the shoe-in Nintendo was hoping for, as the game itself was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of quality, Splatoon was a smash hit, landing a dedicated player base who loved the game for its unique and fun gameplay, along with its competitive value. These titles showed that Nintendo was seemingly interested in the idea, but were just insistent on using new franchises for a competitive format, rather than capitalizing on Smash's pre-existing scene. For the past few years, Nintendo almost seemed just about on the edge of giving the realm of esports a real shot. I'll never forget watching the Switch's reveal and seeing the scene at the end with the two teams of sponsored players planning and preparing for their video game tournament, only to walk up on this ginormous stage surrounded by thousands and thousands of people watching and cheering, with Nintendo logos plastered everywhere. It was incredibly bold of them to put a vision like that in the reveal trailer for their next major console. It got many people's hopes up as they wondered if Nintendo was going to attempt to turn that imagery into a reality, and many also looked at that and wondered, what if this, but Smash? This seemed to be a real possibility as Nintendo started hosting more significant Splatoon, Smash, and ARMS competitions. But still, none ever had cash prizes, which is a bit of a bummer, but it was still finally a sign of real support for competitive gaming. They even started associating themselves with certain major tournaments, allowing them to put their name and branding on the stream layouts, although they still gave no other aid besides letting those tournaments technically be official. Though, this came at a rather large cost. In an attempt to butter up Nintendo, these tournaments would no longer involve Project M, a brawl mod that became a completely original fan-made Smash game with its own incredibly passionate community. This was simply a death sentence for the game, and it doesn't help that around the same time, development of the game was put to a stop for an unexplained, although easily assumable reason. And either way, it's another casualty of Nintendo's stern mentality towards fan games in general. There's a very good chance you've heard of at least one project they've shut down, whether it's the Mario Battle Royale game that lived for a few days, or the Metroid 2 remake that was live for a few hours. These works are always completely non-profit, and the reason usually given for Nintendo shutting them down is to protect their intellectual property. It's always disappointing that Nintendo sees no value in the work put in to make these projects a reality, but in the case of PM, it seemed a necessary sacrifice in order to increase potential for Smash as a whole to grow. Nevertheless, things remained at a healthy level. The Melee community and the Smash community as a whole would continue to grow. People would travel to events and grind the games with friends, trying to better their skills and rise up the ranks. Things were going well, and both Ultimate and Melee were looking to only get bigger and bigger, as Smash's greatest ever opportunity was looking to be lined up for 2020. The Smash World Tour was to be a tournament circuit series where players would compete to earn points at various tournaments, and those with the most points would compete in the finals for a piece of over $250,000 in prize money. Money that the community has never seen anything like. Not to mention, with so much on the line, each of the events in the circuit series would get a major boost in viewership, and more people would be showing up to participate in the competition, putting in their all trying to win, or at least see how close they could get to winning. Needless to say, even without Nintendo's help, it was easily going to be the biggest year that Smash has ever seen. And then 2020 happened. With everyone unable to leave their homes, it goes without saying that most major tournaments and the Smash World Tour were cancelled, or at least put on indefinite hiatus. A tragic loss for the entire community, as no longer was Smash's biggest year going to happen, and being unable to play these games offline definitely lessened interest in Smash as a whole. For the Ultimate community, those who loved the game tolerated its online mode. keyword being tolerate. Even with the best possible internet speed, it suffers from additional input delay that does not exist offline, even more so than really any other fighting game. But people still suffer through it for the sake of competing in online tournaments and just being able to play the game. For the Melee community though, this was a bit of a game killer. As a 19-year-old game, it had no online functionality. And while there are some services that allow you to play against someone over the internet, it didn't do Melee justice just because of how incredibly input intensive and skill heavy the game was. Online alternatives would just leave the game feeling entirely different just from any bit of extra lag. From a future as bright as Smash World Tour to being unable to play the game at all, Melee's future was looking extremely bleak. But on June 22nd, a computer engineer that goes by Fizzy released an update for a program titled Slippy that aimed to add online enhancements to Melee when played on a computer. This update introduced a matchmaking system which made it absurdly simple to find matches and connect with friends, but more importantly introduced rollback to the game's netcode. What rollback is incredibly difficult to explain, and is more or less a miracle of coding. Essentially, in most normal delay-based netcode, like what Ultimate uses, latency is handled in one of two ways. Either by slowing down the game until the connection can catch up, or by simply increasing the delay until the gameplay looks smooth, at the price of feeling terrible. Both solutions still end up feeling sluggish, unresponsive, and generally unpleasant. Rollback still usually runs on a small delay, but anytime a lag spike occurs, it simply fills in the blanks the best it can, and corrects itself, or rolls back, when the connections are stable again. How exactly it does that comes back to the miracle of coding, but when all is said and done, rollback netcode allows technical games like Melee to feel actually pretty good. Integrating this kind of netcode into Melee was a godsend for the scene, to say the least. Suddenly there was a real alternative to playing offline, and its easy accessibility got many who didn't even play it to give it a real shot. In a real reversal between it and Ultimate, Melee was now the game with better online play. Nintendo did patch Ultimate to make Wi-Fi feel just a little bit better, but it's still far from incredible and far from industry standard. With this, the community was back in a pretty comfortable position. Not a great position, but a comfortable one. Both Melee tournaments and Ultimate tournaments were back in full swing, with many that were planned for the year choosing to still take place just online instead. These brackets were definitely one of the major things keeping the community alive, and coming up on the end of the year, one of the community's biggest tournaments, the Big House, was planning to run its 10th installment in early December, until Nintendo sent them a cease and desist. Because of the fact they were using Slippy as part of their tournament, the entire thing had to be shut down. Nintendo soon after issued a statement where they stated, "Nintendo appreciates the love and dedication the fighting game community has for the Super Smash Bros. Series. Unfortunately, Big House was going to be holding a tournament that requires illegal copies of our game in conjunction with a mod. They refused to stop, so we threatened legal action. We cannot condone piracy of our property." This is heartless, to say the least. In a time where going outside to play the game is quite literally a life-threatening risk, shutting down the only way for fans to engage in what has become a yearly tradition is downright evil. You may say that Nintendo was in their right to shut down a tournament that was being run through third-party software, where most users were playing on a pirated copy, but let me ask you, what benefit does this serve them? Much like how Nintendo strikes down the sites that offer thousands of classic games without offering any legal way to play said games, with this move, Nintendo is trying to kill a service that they have no intentions of ever replicating. Additionally, I'd be willing to bet good money that each and every person who is going to compete in the tournament has a physical copy of Melee somewhere in their house, and in that scenario, there's more legal ambiguity to it than Nintendo wants you to believe, so calling it illegal and pirated is a blatant lie. The strangest part of this is Nintendo is passing on a ginormous business opportunity. Most gaming companies would kill for a game they made 20 years ago to be this relevant and lucrative. If Nintendo were to work with the Slippy devs to bring both Melee and its rollback netcode to Switch, then I'm sure there could be a win-win situation. But instead, it all comes back around to Nintendo being resilient towards any project that did not come from within company walls. Though, as the Smash community would find out only a few days later, it turns out the biggest lie of that whole paragraph was the very first sentence. A tweet was made by the anonymous user AnonymousSmasher2 entailing a mountain of information written by someone who's supposedly an insider, and this tweet gave us all the devastating picture of what was really going on. To summarize, Nintendo is actively holding back the entire Smash scene across all of the games. They specifically shot down major esports organizations such as MLG, E-League, and ESL to name a few, stopping them from sponsoring and involving themselves with Smash. Twitch and Red Bull were trying to get Smash circuits going with budgets in the millions, willing to front the money while Nintendo makes no financial contribution, and Nintendo would barely communicate and dragged it out to the point of cancellation. And lastly, PM was dropped from tournaments not because of a cease and desist, but because Nintendo promised to work with these tournaments had the deed been done, and the TOs made the sacrifice expecting help from Nintendo, only for it to never come. From the average player's perspective, it seemed that Nintendo just ignored the competitive community, but it turns out they were well aware of it and did everything in their power to stilt its growth. Meanwhile, taking a step away from the Smash community for a moment, the competitive Splatoon community was in a better position, albeit not by much. While there was little crossover between the two, there was a mutual respect being that they're both under Nintendo's reign. But unlike Smash, Nintendo actually liked prefacing Splatoon as a competitive game. Splatoon would see frequent competitions from Nintendo, albeit with little to no prizing, as I mentioned before, but it was still something as that support still meant a lot to them like it would have to the Smash community. On December 6th, just weeks after the Big House incident, there was to be a Splatoon tournament streamed by Nintendo themselves. Though upon seeing how Nintendo was treating the Smash community, those participating in the tournament decided to form a bit of a protest. All they did was simply change their name tags to show their support for competitive Smash. So of course, after Nintendo noticed that their own community was speaking up for those they've tried so hard to suppress, Nintendo cancelled the stream. Now, from each of these incidents, there were numerous hashtags formed, with three major ones: Free Melee, Save Smash, and Save Splatoon, and they're all worth spreading as they louden our voice and each address a specific situation. But there's a fourth hashtag I feel is the most bold, and yet the most accurate. Hashtag Nintendo Hates You. This isn't just Nintendo stopping you from playing your favorite game in a competitive fashion. This is Nintendo stopping an art form. If you know the name of any single competitive player, I absolutely guarantee that they put in more than a 9 to 5 studying and practicing the game to perfect their craft, and there's a reason why you know who they are. Many dedicate a large portion of their lives to it, and there's nothing they want to see more than their favorite game become as large as it could be. The competitive base of a game is not just a small portion of fans, it's those with real passion, trying to make the game into something truly special, something that brings people together, and that same kind of passion is what made Nintendo what it is. Nintendo fans are some of the most dedicated of any companies, but when anyone demonstrates their love through coding, designing, creativity, or even just competing, Nintendo sees it as a threat, and they will go out of their way to make sure that threat is silenced. At the end of the day though, while the story is far from over, there is a bit of a silver lining for the end of the year. Shortly after the news broke out that Nintendo had cancelled the stream, a small organization known as Endgame TV came up with a devious little idea, and soon announced that those who were going to be competing in Nintendo's Splatoon tournament were now going to be competing in a small bracket known as the Squid House. While the prize of Nintendo's tournament was nothing more than a trophy, the Squid House was starting with a $1,000 prize pot, with donations accepted throughout the tournament. With the Smash community seeing the Splatoon community throwing themselves under the bus in support of Melee, the two came together for the stream as more Smash players than ever watched in awe of what could very well be the all-time most significant Splatoon tournament ever hosted. Not to mention they raised over $28,000, with over $3,000 of that going to charity. Nobody quite knows for sure what the Squid House means for the future of Splatoon, and judging by Nintendo's ongoing actions, it seems doubtful at best that the whole ordeal caused them to change their ways. But it set a powerful precedent, and hopefully sent a clear message to Nintendo. Whether you're with us or not, we will stand up and fight for the communities we built, and we're not going away.